Information, research and advocacy on the oil and gas sector. We want to be a center of excellence in respect to the oil and gas sector. And we want to promote linkages with the local communities. And so currently we're about 45 members who are deregistered. And yeah, basically that's it in summary.
Mr. Mugyenyi, what is it that we're supposed to be doing that we're not doing, and what should we do?
There are quite a number of things. I have already indicated that one of the important things that we need to be doing is putting in place the necessary regulatory and legal framework. That's very, very important. You asked a question about how oil actually can help us in terms of conserving the environment, in terms of improving actually the situation here. And I think without this necessary legal framework, for example, on revenue sharing and revenue management, then you won't be able actually to do the necessary investments to make sure that actually people who are depleting the environment, who depend on fuel wood, are able to transform their lives and be able, because this money is going to go into infrastructure, electricity generation. But as long as you have people that are still poor, you will still have this power, but they will not be able to use the power because they will not have the means. So the best way to do it is to have a legal framework, a regulatory framework that is able to regulate the investment. If we get this revenue, where are we investing it? Who is making the decisions where to invest it? If it is going into the budget process, is the budget process open and transparent, and therefore the citizen is able to influence where these resources are going? And I think that is going to be done if you have a revenue management that is able to indicate how you are going to share this revenue. You are going to have these districts, for example, in the oil region, which are now going to suffer in terms of look at the population that is moving there. They are going to suffer putting in place infrastructure, and the environment in that area is likely much more to be affected than elsewhere. So when you talk about revenue sharing, are you taking them into consideration? What is the burden that they are going to be shouldering, and who is going to determine that? It is this legislation that is supposed to determine that. How you are going to invest this money, it is this legislation that is going to determine that. All right. But in the first place, you need the regulation, the strong laws. That is I think the first important aspect that we need to be dealing with.
Let's take it deeper. We already have a policy with the national oil and gas policy that you mentioned. We were helped by Norway to put it in place. It's an excellent policy. Many people have said so. We are lacking the laws. We need to move faster on the laws. But let's broaden it a little bit. People have said we need a regulatory agency to oversee the industry. We need a national oil company to help manage the industry alongside other people. We used to have Mobil in the past, which became UPET. We also need to have a national resource fund where the oil money comes, where we keep the oil money. Are those things that we're moving towards doing? Do you see the government doing those things?
Yep, precisely. And that's why I'm talking about this legislation, because it is only this legislation that is going to put that institutional framework in place and independent regulation of this sector. And it's a good starting point that we have the policy, and everybody is happy and excited that actually we have a good policy. But you note two things. That one, this policy does not have a monitoring and evaluation framework. In other words, it does not set the milestones that we can keep on looking at and say we are moving forward, we are achieving this, we are achieving this. That is the first weakness that there is. And therefore now, you are not able to say, government, you set time frames within which to put the law in place, and now the law is not in place. Government keeps on telling you, yes, we are in the process of putting the law in place. So we need to have that monitoring and evaluation framework that sets the indicators and the milestones so that we are able to keep ticking and say we are making progress in terms of implementing this policy. But as you said, these are the laws that are going actually to do that kind of regulation. Whether you create the fund, how you use that fund, how decisions are made, the independent regulation, all those aspects are supposed to be in these two laws. That's why I think putting in place these two laws is really a very fundamental aspect. And that's where actually I agree with Parliament. When Parliament passed a resolution and said, no, one of the things that we need to do very fast is to put in place these laws before we go into some signing fresh agreements, you need to have a framework, the basis on which actually these production sharing agreements are being signed.
Very briefly, Mr. Mugyenyi, how should we spend this money? Should we invest it abroad in U.S. Treasury bonds and other things?
They are still mixed views. The research has been done. It indicates actually how different countries have managed this, and we need to have a consensus. And how do you develop this consensus? You need to have the proposals, put these proposals in the law, allow people to discuss them, and then you pick the best scenario. But having the fund is one aspect. But in an area where you also have actually a budget that is not sufficient and you're still depending on the donor, then you may need to see actually how this money gets into the budget, to be invested in the necessary infrastructure that is going to actually transform this country. So there is research that has been done, and we need to build the consensus. And it's only when you have this draft law that is subjected to public debate that you are able to develop the consensus, looking at the advantages of those different forms of managing revenue.
And of course, we have the National Development Plan as well.
Just to add to that statement, is that beyond the law is the institutions and is the practice. That after having the law, of course the law is the first place, because the law sets in place the institution, and then provides for the funding in terms of budgetary allocations. But I think we need to look at also the institutional framework, and I think to me that is sort of the missing link. That when you look at the existing laws, we do have a wonderful National Environment Act, an environmental law is in place. But when you look at the environment evils taking place in this country, that you have people, reclaiming wetlands just down the street, you have these forests, and these forests disappearing, and much of it in central forest reserves, and beyond into the private forest reserves, which holds about 70%, is that there's already a sort of an indicator that we may not be doing very well, even with the law, that the outcomes are still inadequate, because the outcome is the greatest indicator of whether the law, the institution, and the money are actually working. So to me, I think I really support this idea of giving institutions a platform to develop, to grow like Parliament, giving institutions like the ministry, that we should sort of take some of these decision-making processes and build strong institutions that can take a decision. I pray for the day when the minister can stand on his feet and take a strong decision.
I think an independent decision that is informed by
looking over his shoulder. Mr. Baziira. Yes. Do you think we should have a national oil company, for instance?
For a start, it's good.
Yeah.
But when I look at the institutions that we have, with the problems that lie in the various institutions of corruption, mismanagement of resources, lack of transparency and accountability, I shiver at the thought of having a national oil company. Because
the wolves will be waiting at the door.
Exactly. The wolves will be waiting at the door. And a national oil company, how are you going to constitute it in an environment where government is moving away to...
Well, you have UDC, government is moving back into the...
Government believes in privatization.
Well, they've changed a little bit. Now they're moving
private sector-led economy. And now you have a national oil company. Who are going to be the board members? Are they going to be directors? And, those kind of questions. Then now the question comes in. A national oil company doesn't have assets, is also picking the same liability as the international oil company. It is not particularly involved in the production of oil. It is waiting to receive the receipts. It's a downstream thing. And like human beings with a culture of making too many mistakes, somebody down at the wellhead might be bribed to falsify the receipts. Surely it scares me.
Mr. Mugyenyi, that's a different range. It's about that perspective. Knock the national oil company potentially, and then this corruption ogre at monster.
Well, in theory, a national oil company it sounds good. It sounds a very good idea, but I want us to look at actually the whole question of governance in this country, because Henry has already indicated that actually we've had wonderful institutions in this country, like the Inspectorate of Government, like National Environment Management Authority. Now we need to look at what actually went wrong with these institutions before actually we think of creating new institutions that actually are going to suffer the same fate. So I think that kind of reflection would be very, very important. In theory, I agree. You need this to hold certainly the assets, but you need to have a reflection and make sure that actually this national oil company does not actually fall into the same trap. So issues of managing corruption, issues of institutional coordination, issues of institutional space to implement.
That's right.
Being shielded from political interference is the biggest problem that institutions have suffered in this country. And it's regrettable that actually we have a government that put up very useful institutions, but again has crippled these institutions and then they're not able to function. And I can see the national oil company suffering the same fate.
Yeah, let's hear from your listeners. Our number 0414-348-111, 0312-260-390, 0312-261-390. Of course, you gave us a very, very interesting perspective there. Institutional coordination, that's an interesting concept. And institutional space, you have good institutions that are NEMA and so on, the Inspectorate General of Government, but then you have people riding roughshod over them, making statements that seem to undermine them.
Yeah, Edmund, I just wanted to reflect on something here.
Yes.
That I think the question that you have just asked, what we are debating now, is a very big question. That, to me, looking into the future is a question of uncertainty.
Yeah.
Because looking back in 1960, I was not there.
You probably weren't born.
Yeah, but who could have known that in 2011, the level of mobile penetration in this country?
Mobile phone penetration.
So it's the same thing that, in as much as there are indications of things going wrong,
right.
Yeah, but the future is so uncertain that positive things
could happen. Let's hear from our listener, then I'll let you continue later.
Hello, good evening, Edmond.
Good evening, sir. Your name again?
Yeah, this is Wamboga Mugyenyi.
Yes, Peter.
Edmond, I want to thank you for bringing up the issues of the legal frameworks, the policies around the resources of the country. But I want to focus on remote areas of the country.
Oh, Peter, we've lost you. Please do call back in. We'd like to hear your perspective. Spectrum, hello?
Yes, good evening.
Good evening, your name?
My name is James Kashaya.
Yes, Mr. Kashaya.
I want to thank you for your talk, for your show. Now, I'm so worried at this time when the country is divided about the oil issue. And I'm wondering if government institutions like the Parliament, the executive and the judiciary are not united on this issue, when the oil is not yet, actually the production is not yet in place. Now, what happens when we have money oil in place with this rampant corruption that has engulfed all other institutions? I think we need to come out soberly with some of the laws that can regulate that important sector. Otherwise, we are seeing something going on wrong. Thank you very much.
All right. Spectrum, hello? Okay. Let's continue. Mr. Ddamulira.
Yes.
I cut you short earlier.
Yes. I was just saying that the future is really a bit uncertain.
Yes.
And things could fall in either way. So we shouldn't be sort of pessimistic. We in spite of what we're going through at the moment, we should be.
Things will be better tomorrow. The things will stop stealing. Let's get the background to that.
Yes.
Because we don't want to be widely optimistic. Let's be realistic.
I think the indications are that Ugandans are becoming more conscious of what good governance really is, and what it means, what are the consequences of bad governance, in the sense that when you look at some of these astronomical figures in the papers and how they could be applied to development, for example, how much schools could be constructed in, say, $2 billion.
People will repent.
You know, so within that context of positivity, it's just that the future is uncertain, and 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, we may be looking at a Uganda that none of us ever imagined could ever happen.
Spectrum, hello?
Yeah.
Hello? Hello? Okay, please switch off your radio and talk to us. Okay, we seem not to be able to. Spectrum, hello? Okay, the line seems to have a problem. Mr. Baziira.
Sir.
Talk to us about, let's talk about transparency. People have been saying, let's talk about the oil sector. The government says, no, it is secret. But there are things that are not supposed to be secret. The laws, for instance, when Parliament put their foot down, the minister began to say, now I'll speed up these laws. Is there something wrong with the hard drive and the mindset of this government regarding oil?
Well, I want to address that question of transparency from what I just read from one of our city lawyers, Kenneth Kakuru.
Go on.
Because he talked about stamp duty, where every agreement that is signed by government must pay stamp duty. And he actually sent my mind reeling, wondering, if stamp duty was paid for any government contract, that means that document has become public document.
It's 1%, is it 1%?
Whatever it is,
right.
The fact that there is stamp duty, calling for every government contract to pay stamp duty, therefore making that document public, to me is a good mechanism of making these contracts public.
Yes.
And so, questions rose in my mind is, did these companies actually pay that stamp duty? Whether it was 1%, 0 point something percent, did they actually do that? And if they did that, that makes the contract public. So by the fact that they have enshrined confidentiality clauses in the contracts, which would, I would say, goes against the public interest, public expectation, to me is an undoing of our law. And the fact that we still have even the Official Secrets Act operating today, where we have an access to information law today, which also unfortunately shoots itself in the foot, to me is also an undoing of the law.
Well, but secrecy applies even in other places. In the UK, they release certain documents would be classified until after 30 years.
Secrecy even applies in our bedrooms. So there is some degree of secrecy. So it must be clearly spelled out and say, this far you can go, this far you can't go. And made it clear to the general public. But for people to continuously do shifting of goalposts, because that's a framework.
Mr. Ddamulira, what's the practice in other places, transparency?
I think the general practice is that international standards call for some bit of confidentiality when it comes to technological innovations, particularly before they are actually launched. And oil company being a complex industry that it is, secrets around the drilling, chemicals that they use to actually achieve better results, secrets around the drilling technique. Are you going to use a slanted rig? Are you going to use a directional rig or a vertical rig? Secrets like that can be accepted, that it's okay for Coca-Cola not to share its recipe with Pepsi, but I think when it comes to matters of social equity, environment issues,
public resources,
revenue management, like what Onesmus has just been referring to, transformative development, these are issues where every one of us has a right to contribute to the discussion, and every one of us has an obligation to participate. So we should have platforms, and the only way we can have platforms, say the National Oil and Gas Policy, Section 7.3, calls for civil society to play roles of advocacy and holding different players accountable. But how can civil society hold different players accountable if we don't have information? If we don't know what was the agreement on actually how the oil company is going to manage its waste,
Right.
on how
It has a direct bearing on the environment.
yes, on how oil companies is going to manage the social issues around oil development, cultural, archaeological sites. All these are meant to be contained in these documents. And I think the initial goodwill from government should have been expressed by making sections on these issues public. And actually calling for partners enshrined in the National Oil and Gas Policy to contribute during the drafting of the contract. What is the civil society perspective on environment management in the oil industry?
Yes.
What does the cultural institutions, the Bunyoro Kingdom, who are the sort of traditional residents in these places, what are their perspectives on how cultural resources must be managed? And based on those...
What do you mean cultural resources?
Cultural resources in terms of oil has a habit of attracting people like immigrations, and that
People
has cultural...
They come with their own culture.
Yes, that has cultural consequences.
These are very sensitive things. It's not about money.
Yes, language, dressing, marriage, all those things that we do as a
Things they do and the things they don't do.
yeah. So to me, there should have been that initial process in which we have a roundtable discussion, and government says, hey, as Ugandans, these people want to come and do business with us, but what do you think? What do you think? And then build a common position for Uganda into these agreements, such that the outcome is shared. If the outcome is negative, we will say that those were our ideas. But if the outcome is positive, we jubilate. Okay, so to me, I think there's a need for the government to come out clearly and demonstrate that goodwill. And as far as the current process has been, I think that goodwill has been quite short in coming.
Mr. Mugyenyi, talk to us about the possibility of the Dutch disease, where people abandon other things to do just oil, to watch oil.
Yeah, that's a common feature, and we have our neighbor in North Africa, Nigeria, which has actually suffered the same disease, where everybody moved away from agriculture, and now you have real issues. And the point is that this is a resource that generates very serious revenue. And you find that unless if you've planned very well, unless if you've invested in these other sectors, everybody is likely to be moving into this sector. And one of our colleagues recently indicated that actually we've already started experiencing some shift, even within our NGO sector. Emerging civil society organizations, those that were doing different things now moving into this direction. Yes. So you are likely actually to abandon many of other issues and focus on this sector, because there is this incentive, there is an attraction of funds. But you need to remember that this is a resource that is exhaustible. For the time being, we have the reserves that are likely to take us for 25 years, which is not such a long period of time. And therefore, what we need to be doing is to invest these resources in other sectors. For example, we need to look at what is the base of the country. If it is agriculture, then we need to get money from this sector that is going to be exhausted in a short time and invest it in these other lasting sectors. And the moment we forget that, Nigeria is lucky because their reserves are much bigger.
Yes.
And therefore, they are likely to correct some of these mistakes along the way, because they still have actually big reserves. But in a country where we're talking about such a small reserves, I know it's just 40% that has been explored, and therefore we still have the other 60%. But based on what we've found now, there is an indication that actually it may not be very huge reserves as it happens in these other countries.
Right.
And therefore, that's what we need to be looking looking at how do you invest in these other sectors that are more sustainable and are going to be around for a very long time.
We have to go. Our time is up. Talk to us very briefly about the Earth Hour campaign. What is it?
Thank you very much, Edmond. The Earth Hour campaign is a global voluntary movement calling upon all people in the world, and WWF Uganda is spearheading this effort in Uganda. We are calling upon all Ugandans to come to us. We are at Plot 2 Starrock Road in Koloro.
Yes.
And we welcome all Ugandans that want to make a lifetime commitment. You may want to plant a tree, you may want to change your lifestyle to benefit, to conserve natural resources.
You can also park your car and walk. It's another way to do it.
You can use less energy, so you will be seeing a lot of media publications on this, and we hope that you'll be able to join us in this effort.
Our time is up. Thank you very much, dear guests. Mr. Henry Baziira, Chairman of the Civil Society Coalition on Oil and Gas, also Executive Director of the Water Cabinet Institute. Thank you for coming to Spectrum, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Robert Ddamulira, Energy and Climate Manager at the Worldwide Fund for Nature. Thank you for coming tonight. Mr. Onesmus Mugyenyi, Deputy Executive Director and Manager of Environmental Democracy Program at ACODE, giving us new concepts which, if you're listening, you really need to think about this. We couldn't discuss everything. Oil is still a new thing. But our prayer is that the people concerned will put their best foot forward and do the right thing. The oil is not your tear. When it comes, you need to be prepared. Thank you for tuning in. I've been your host, Edmond Chester. Spectrum will be back tomorrow. Up next is the news in English.
Maria! Hey, Mom, what are you doing here? I forgot to spread on the other slice, Maria. Take this.
Hey, Mrs. Makumbi, what are you doing here?
You